she has more confidence and she goes for her shots without any doubt, I would say.
This was definitely one of the bigger Filipino turnouts. Also, New York was huge.
Nobody warned Austria. Linz Open has been a quiet, prestigious stop on the WTA calendar for nearly 4 decades. Barbara Krejcikova won here, Aryna Sabalenka won here. Ekaterina Alexandrova came back this week to defend her title. These are serious tennis names in a serious tennis town. Then Alex Eala arrived, ranked 45th, clay season debut, 0 points to defend, and something completely unprecedented followed her through the doors of Design Center Linz on April 6th. Her 2 million Filipino army doesn't care about geography.
I've only dreamed of making tennis grow in the Philippines, and now I'm bringing a whole new audience to tennis all around the world.
They showed up in Melbourne and overwhelmed Court 6 until hundreds were physically turned away. They showed up in Dubai until Jessica Pegula could literally hear Eala's matches from her hotel room. They showed up at Indian Wells and outnumbered the fans of Alexander Zverev and Taylor Fritz combined. WTA stars are now being forced to publicly respond, and what they're saying is actively dividing the entire tennis world. Svitolina played near empty stands in Dubai the moment Eala's match ended. Parks broke into tears on court in Melbourne because of crowd pressure. Tournament directors are rescheduling matches around Filipino time zone preferences. Austria goes wild, and nobody inside women's tennis can stay silent about it anymore. And for the first time, the WTA Tour and the players inside it are being forced to publicly respond, and what they're saying is dividing the entire tennis world. Subscribe right now, because this story is only getting bigger from here. And the numbers don't lie. This was never just about tennis.
Eala, the phenomenon. We didn't know, largely, the tennis community a year ago before her run in Miami, and now it's must-see TV and drawing maybe the biggest crowds anyone outside of Alcaraz Center in the...
Let's start with what actually happened in Austria this week, because the Linz Open reaction to Eala's arrival tells you everything about where women's tennis currently stands and why the tension inside the locker rooms has reached a level that nobody can comfortably ignore anymore. The Design Center. Linz is not a massive venue. It holds a few thousand people on a good day, and for most of its 4-decade history, it has operated exactly the way you'd expect a mid-tier European clay event to operate. Respectful crowds, organized scheduling, predictable atmospheres. The kind of tournament where players can focus entirely on their game without external chaos interfering. That changed the moment Eala's name appeared on the draw. Tournament organizers in Linz watched what happened in Melbourne, Dubai, and Indian Wells. They had weeks to prepare, and yet, by every account coming out of Austria this week, the Filipino presence at the Design Center Linz has been unlike anything the tournament has experienced in its 4 decades of existence. Filipino flags in a landlocked European city. A 20-year-old from Quezon City is drawing the kind of attention that seasoned Grand Slam champions in the same draw simply cannot match right now. Ekaterina Alexandrova is the defending champion. Emma Raducanu has been one of the most talked about players in women's tennis for 5 years. Jelena Ostapenko is a French Open champion with a game that genuinely excites crowds. Clara Tauson is ranked inside the top 20. These are not anonymous players. These are established, marketable names with their own fan bases.
Another wonderful win for Alexandra Eala.
And yet, here we are. Within hours of the Linz draw being released, Filipino fan communities across Central Europe were already coordinating ticket purchases. The same advanced mobilization pattern that preceded the sellouts in Melbourne and Dubai. Eala made a quarterfinal run at the Dubai Tennis Championships, defeating world number 8 Jasmine Paolini 6-1, 7-6 in the 3rd round, before facing Coco Gauff in the quarterfinals.
Thank you, Jasmine, she says. Paolini gracious as ever in defeat. The former champion is out. Alexandra Eala.
The matches themselves were remarkable, but what surrounded them was something else entirely. Every session Eala played in Dubai was effectively a sold-out event. Filipino supporters, who make up a massive portion of the Middle East's expatriate population, bought tickets in numbers that shocked even Dubai's tournament officials. Jessica Pegula, one of the world's top 5 players, later described on a podcast how she could physically hear the noise from Eala's matches through the walls of her hotel. That detail sounds amusing on the surface, but think about what it actually represents. A top 5 player, at her own tournament, being orally dominated by the fan base of a player ranked outside the top 30 at the time. Then came the scheduling decision that genuinely irritated other players. Tournament directors in Dubai moved Eala's quarterfinal match against Goff to an earlier slot in the evening session, specifically to accommodate Filipino viewing times back home. The knock-on effect was immediate and damaging for Alina Svitolina, who was scheduled to play afterward. When Eala's match ended, the arena emptied. Svitolina, a former world number 3, a 4-time WTA 1000 champion, someone who has carried enormous personal weight, playing through the backdrop of a war in her home country, walked out to face Antonia Ruzic in front of a fraction of the crowd that had been there minutes earlier. That is not a small thing in professional sports. Crowd energy affects performance. Television optics affect sponsorship negotiations. Empty seats after a marquee match send a message to broadcasters and tournament sponsors about which players are actually moving the needle commercially. Svitolina has never publicly attacked Eala or her fanbase. She is far too professional for that, but the frustration within her camp, and within camps of similarly affected players, has not gone unnoticed by people inside the tour. January 2026, Eala's first ever Australian Open main draw appearance. Court 6 at Melbourne Park, a mid-sized show court that seats a few thousand people, was assigned for her first-round match against American Alicia Parks. What followed was a scheduling and crowd management failure that Martina Navratilova publicly criticized the Australian Open organization for. Hundreds of fans were physically turned away from the venue. The queue to get into Court 6 stretched back toward Rod Laver Arena. Inside, every seat was taken, every standing position occupied, every viewing ledge filled. Filipino flags covered the stands in a way that made it look less like an Australian Open first-round match and more like a Davis Cup tie. Parks, to her enormous credit, won the match 0-6, 6-3, 6-2 after losing the first set without winning a single game. She was visibly emotional during that opening set, seen in tears, rattled by an atmosphere she described afterward as unlike anything she had encountered before. "It was very difficult," Parks said in her post-match press conference. "I was expecting it, but I wasn't. She definitely has a good crowd. I just kept telling myself to stay in the zone. I was just so focused on the crowd in the first set, which is why it went the way it went." Parks recovered and won. But her post-match comments opened a conversation that the WTA Tour could no longer pretend wasn't happening. Social media erupted with debate about crowd etiquette, specifically about whether Eala's supporters were cheering Parks' unforced errors in a way that crossed the line between passionate support and unsportsmanlike behavior. Vision of the crowd erupting when Parks dumped a smash into the net went viral, and the reactions from within the tennis community were pointed. One widely shared comment read, "It's too much what the crowd is doing, cheering midpoint and distracting the opponent. It shouldn't be allowed." Another noted that Parks was so rattled she couldn't even hit a ball in the court in the first set, and questioned whether the atmosphere was fair to her as a competitor. These weren't comments from random trolls. These were perspectives being shared and amplified by people who follow professional tennis closely, including, privately, people connected to players on the WTA Tour. Before her Australian Open match even began, Eala found herself in a genuinely dangerous situation during a practice session at Melbourne Park. She recounted the incident on the Players Box podcast with Jessica Pegula, Madison Keys, Jennifer Brady, and Desiree Krawczyk, and the details are striking. Eala had been practicing on an outdoor court with bleachers on the sides and a ramp leading up to it. She had no security present. When she finished her session and tried to leave, the crowd that had gathered to watch her practice compressed around her to the point where she was being physically pushed backward toward a wall. And there was a wall back here, and if the traffic of people was coming and they couldn't see what was happening over there, they were all just pushing, Eala described. They were all kind of pushing you against the wall, and I was getting closer and closer to the wall. I was like, oh, that's kind of dangerous. She eventually shouted for space, and her father and coach helped clear a path. This is the side of extreme fandom that tournament organizers are now being forced to respond to in practical, logistical terms.
We're not concerned about anyone else right now. It's Alex Eala time. This is Alex Eala's moment. Our days, our dinners, our evenings are fixated on when she's playing. That's real tennis fandom right there. Love it.
This is so great for tennis in general.
Yeah.
I think having players like Alex out there, and she's so gracious to all her fans. She spends time with her fans, signs the autographs, takes the photos, and really just shows the Filipino community that it is all about the Philippines. And I still carry that flag with me no matter where I go across the world.
Security details, court assignments, session scheduling, crowd management protocols. These are conversations happening at every tournament Eala enters. Conversations that simply did not exist at this level for women's tennis outside of the Serena Williams era. Indian Wells in March 2026 offered perhaps the clearest snapshot of Eala's commercial power, and why the tour's official response has been to lean into it rather than manage it down. Hundreds of fans packed a practice court under the Palm Springs sun specifically to watch Eala train at noon on a Tuesday. On adjacent courts, Alexander Zverev and Taylor Fritz, a Southern California native and former Indian Wells champion, were also practicing. Between them, they attracted a handful of spectators. The contrast was documented and reported by Front Office Sports, and it triggered a wave of commentary about what Eala represents for the sport's business model. Indian Wells posted 9 women on Instagram as its Class of 2026, 7 top 10 players, 1 well-known American, and Eala. She was ranked outside the top 30 at the time. The tournament's Day in the Life video featuring her generated 94,000 YouTube views, by far the most watched video the tournament had produced that year. These are decisions made by tournament marketing teams based on ticket sales data, social media engagement metrics, and broadcast interest. They are not made out of sentiment. The WTA Tour itself sanctioned a first-ever tournament in the Philippines in January 2026, the Philippine Women's Open, in direct response to the commercial opportunity created by Eala's rise. That event attracted Camila Osorio, Donna Vekic, and a field of genuine WTA players to Manila. Osorio, who won the title, later spoke about the experience at her pre-tournament press conference in Bogotá, describing how honored she was to have played in the Philippines against someone of Eala's stature. The tournament was a commercial success and a watershed moment for Philippine tennis. But here's the tension that sits underneath all of this commercial enthusiasm. And it's the tension that actually has WTA stars furious in ways they can't always express publicly. When tournament organizers prioritize Eala's scheduling for time zone and commercial reasons, other players pay a tangible cost. When marketing budgets flow toward Eala-centered content, other players receive less visibility. When crowds empty after her matches, other players perform in front of diminished audiences that affect their own marketability.
After that, and watch her try to continue to progress, because I like her game. Obviously, she wants to get better than where she is now.
The tour is making a rational commercial decision. Eala drives revenue right now in a way that few players can match. But rational, commercial decisions can still feel deeply unfair to the players absorbing the consequences. Svitolina's situation in Dubai is the most visible example, but she is not alone. Multiple players in the top 30 have watched their own match atmospheres, scheduling slots, and tournament visibility affected by the gravitational pull of Eala's fanbase. And the awareness of that dynamic is growing inside locker rooms across the tour. When asked to compare Eala's Filipino supporters to Colombian tennis fans, one of the most passionate national fan bases in South American tennis, Osorio's answer was careful and diplomatic. But the underlying message was clear. She had never experienced anything quite like what she witnessed in Manila. For a player who grew up playing in front of passionate home crowds in Bogotá, that is a meaningful benchmark. The fact that a player who beat Eala on her home soil still came away describing the experience in terms of honor and surprise tells you something important about the scale of what is happening. This is not a fan base that loses gracefully and quietly. This is a fan base that fills venues, generates noise, travels internationally, and creates an atmosphere that affects every single person inside it, winners and losers alike. Eala enters the Linz Open having posted a 2-4 win-loss record on clay across her entire 2025 campaign. Her only win-loss record in clay court main draw WTA matches last year was achieved at the Euros Open, where she reached the round of 16. She exited in the first round at Roland Garros. Clay is genuinely her weakest surface, and the field in Linz, despite its geographic obscurity, is legitimately dangerous for her at this stage of her development. Alexandrova beat her 6-3, 6-3 in Abu Dhabi earlier this season. Ostapenko is a player she has a history with. Raducanu on indoor clay is a different proposition from Raducanu on hard courts. The draw is not kind to an unseeded player with limited clay match experience at this level. But none of that is what Austria is talking about right now. Austria is talking about the flags, the noise, the cues, the way a WTA 500 tournament in a quiet European city suddenly feels like it's hosting something much larger than its official status suggests. The way other players in the draw are navigating press conferences and social media carefully, aware that any comment about crowd atmosphere or scheduling fairness will be immediately amplified and dissected. The 2 million Filipino army showed up in Austria, and the WTA's response to their presence, the tournament's response, and the response from players sharing locker rooms with the woman they follow is reshaping professional women's tennis in real time. Whether that reshaping is ultimately good for the sport depends entirely on which side of Eala's fanbase you're standing on. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, perspectives that go beyond the highlights and actually dig into the dynamics driving professional tennis right now, then subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Every week we cover the stories that the mainstream tennis media either misses or deliberately avoids. Share this video with someone who thinks they already know everything about Alex Eala's rise, because they don't know this part yet. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Are the WTA stars right to be frustrated, or is this simply what happens when a sport finally finds its next generational draw? We're reading every single response,